Thank you for joining me here at One Nation Weather for another straightforward weather forecast discussion. No extra editing, no hype. I'm going to get right into the details on what you need to know, no matter where you live, if you're going to be impacted by Tropical Storm, soon to be Hurricane Helene, as it's going to make landfall somewhere in Florida as we go into Thursday and Thursday night, and then head inland from there going towards Friday and Saturday. Let's go ahead and get into those headlines in this Tuesday, September 24th evening edition. I've got the latest on Tropical Storm Helene in this video, including the cone from the National Hurricane Center and the forecast strength. After that, I will give you a look at what the models have to say, including that precipitation timing breakdown. Then from there, I'll have the specific information and what I really think is going to occur in terms of the wind, rainfall totals, and severe weather risk out of Helene. Let's go ahead and get right into the details, starting with that first headline on the cone. Alright, here is that latest cone of uncertainty on Tropical Storm Helene as of our Tuesday evening when I'm filming this video. We've already got a tropical storm with sustained winds around 50 miles per hour. It's starting to take on that curly Q look as it's going to make its way and thread that needle tonight and into our early Wednesday between Cancun, Mexico, and the western tip of Cuba. You can see that according to the National Hurricane Center's track line and cone of uncertainty, it is expected to come very close, first of all, to Cancun, Mexico, just on that east side with some of those hurricane conditions beginning to pick up. Yep, I said hurricane. It is anticipated to become a 75-mile-per-hour hurricane with 90-mile-per-hour gusts by the time we're getting into our Wednesday afternoon. From there, by the time we go into our Wednesday evening, into the nighttime hours and overnight and into our early Thursday, probably going on the higher end of that Cat 1 strength going towards Cat 2. We'll probably continue to see that transition through early to mid-Thursday, according to this guidance anyway. The Hurricane Center experts, here it is all laid out. Experts are predicting that this will already be a major hurricane around due west of Tampa out here in the Gulf of Mexico, 2 p.m. on our Thursday. This is in Eastern time. Keep that in mind. Thursday, September 26th, 115-mile-per-hour hurricane with 140-mile-per-hour gusts. That is a strong major hurricane. Eventually, the landfall is quite likely sometime Thursday night going into early Friday as this picks up speed. Friday morning around 2 a.m., this thing already making a landfall and into southern Georgia, according to the Hurricane Center. 70-mile-per-hour sustained winds, 85-mile-per-hour gusts by then, after a likely 100-plus mile-per-hour landfall. And then we continue to see the impacts push inland with the eastern side of this cone, even if you're not in those red areas, really feeling the impacts of a lot of rain and wind. The rain and wind will also extend as far inland from there as into places like Illinois and Indiana with a weak tropical depression in terms of the winds by the time we go towards, say, around 2 p.m. on Saturday. With that being said, I want to show you what this cone means in terms of where the highest impacts are going to be. Keep in mind that watches, warnings, they are going to continue to expand. They are going to shift around. I recommend that you check weather.gov and nhc.noaa.gov. Those are the National Weather Service and National Hurricane Center. Those websites will have the best information and up-to-date warnings for your community. But overall, with this current cone, here's what we are looking at. If you're in the yellows on screen, you are under a tropical storm watch. Most of Florida, excluding places like Miami, basically under that tropical storm watch, and also excluded in that is the far western panhandle. Alabama is now in the clear, at least in terms of a lot of the tropical storm and hurricane conditions, but there still will be some rain in those areas at the minimum. Notice there is a far southeastern sliver of Alabama going into Georgia where we also have tropical storm watches, but right there, places like Tampa, Florida, even into some parts of central Florida, trying to go on over there to the Space Coast, we have those blue tropical storm warnings already in effect. Hurricane warnings, storm surge warnings along that major hurricane impact zone there, really into the Big Bend of Florida. If you live in any community near there, you are probably under a hurricane warning or a hurricane watch, which is in that pinkish shade. Again, we will probably continue to see impacts, the alerts extend inland from there, as the storm is expected to bring tropical storm conditions as far inland as northern Georgia and parts of the western Carolinas. Alright, I don't want to spend too much time on this graphic, but this does give you another look at where the storm is projected to go according to the guidance of, in this case, some of the models and ensemble members. Basically, if you live in Tallahassee, Florida, get ready. The landfall is going to be very close to you. That purple zone coming right overhead, where the highest member confidence of these ensemble members are basically a blend of models averaged out. That is where that is. So going through there into far southwestern Georgia, we're probably going to see the center of this storm go Thursday night into Friday. And then from there, we'll probably continue to see the impacts push up towards parts of the Ohio Valley very quickly as this actually tries to connect with another low that is in the upper levels of the atmosphere, sitting over there in parts of Missouri and Arkansas. I showed you that the storm is expected to become Category 3 according to the National Hurricane Center. The models also tend to agree with that or show a little bit of a weaker storm, at least from this guidance on tropicaltidbits.com. These are the models we have available. There are are quite a few on here. The models that keep it at tropical storm strength, I think that's almost impossible at this point. Those are definitely the very low-end outliers. But our higher-end group up here around the Cat 2 to Cat 3 threshold, I think that is a lot more legit. We're probably going to have a stronger-end Cat 2 or a Cat 3 making landfall in that Big Bend region of Florida, or at least that is the most likely scenario. Again, that is going to be Thursday night, coming on shore there with those worst impacts. That will be after a lot of the day Thursday and into the evening. We will see a lot of the heaviest impacts skim through places like Tampa and up that west coast, particularly the northwestern peninsula coast. With the model guidance, with the National Hurricane Center guidance in place, and in fact that National Hurricane Center guidance line still on the screen for that exact track that they're projecting, I want to go ahead and give you a look at the European model because I think it does a great job of picking up the speed, the strength, all of that stuff exactly when the National Hurricane Center projects. And I think it is a good average of overall some of the higher end and lower end guidance that I have seen. So let's play things out here going into the rest of our Tuesday, going into our early Wednesday. Notice we're going to continue to see this sprawling system making its way towards places like Cancun, Mexico, while trying to become a hurricane. From there, overall, no major intensity changes until we get towards late Wednesday heading into early Thursday when this is going to begin to make that northeastward turn, bringing more heavy rainfall. You can see from Miami up to Cape Coral, up to Tampa there in Florida, some isolated bands as we go through late Wednesday into early Thursday. Those could certainly bring some isolated tornadoes across the Florida peninsula, even though the center of this storm is probably still going to be back on over in a place like over here where I'm circling. A lot of those heavier rain impacts all the way across the Florida coast, and things are only going to continue to pick up, particularly for the west coast of Florida heading into our Thursday. This is 11 a.m. Thursday. You can really see it trying to get on up there towards that major hurricane status because of that forming eye wall and that eye that you can almost make out there with that little grayish dot on the screen from the Euro. Up here in Tallahassee, already picking up with some heavy rain. Even though there's only some grays over here, over a lot of the Florida peninsula, that indicates more isolated bands. And if we get some pokes of sun between some of those bands, that could certainly mean more isolated heavy rain and even some tornadoes spinning up as those bands move from east to west across the area. We'll also probably see some tropical storm force winds in some of these coastal areas. Again, especially if you get under those warnings, make sure you're taking that seriously and taking the proper precautions. You need to be ready by the time we go into places like Apalachicola, even as far west as Panama City, and then over here as far east as Spring Hill, heading through 2, 5, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, say 1, 4, 7 Central Time on our Thursday afternoon into the evening. I think this is when the worst impacts, at least according to this model, and a lot of the guidance are going to pick up. Over here from this zone down over to here, if you live in these communities, this is where we're going to see the worst landfall impact. So Apalachicola, Quincy, Florida, Madison, Perry, Lake City, Gainesville, Williston, points in between, and especially closer to the coast from there, we're going to have a bunch of storm surge inundation, in some cases 10 to 15 feet above normal ground levels. We're going to see pounding rain, driving winds that could be upwards of 100 miles per hour sustained, or at least for gusts at times. This is going to be a significant storm. I don't want to ignore the fact that we'll probably still be seeing some tornadic bands on the eastern side of this, moving through a lot of the northern two-thirds of Florida by this point. And then from there, we see this thing really picking up steam. In fact, I want to go back just a second so those of you in southern Georgia can really see what happens. Probably sometime Thursday night going into early Friday, that's when you see your worst impacts. We could see some 50-plus mile per hour sustained winds in a place like Macon, Georgia from this storm. Then this pushes on up towards Atlanta, Greenville, South Carolina, over to Charlotte. By this point in time, we're probably going to be seeing a very heavy fetch like this up against the terrain. That will create our heaviest rainfall potential and, in fact, some landslide potential up there with wind and those downpours up into the mountains surrounding places like Chattanooga, Tennessee, over to Asheville in North Carolina. I don't want to ignore the fact that over there in central Tennessee and over as far west as Missouri and in eastern Arkansas will also be feeling the impacts of that in an upper level system. But look at how quickly this gets carried around and up into the Ohio Valley. I think overall throughout the day Friday we'll see some level of tornado potential, particularly in these zones. But by the time we go, this is as we go into our late Friday into our early Saturday, we're really going to begin to notice the heaviest rain begin to wind down. We'll still have some downpours and some gusty winds moving into the Ohio Valley, but generally the worst impacts that the storm has to offer will be winding down, that's for sure, and we continue to see this break up as we close out the weekend. I envision this could go up, but we've already got a preliminary storm surge forecast from the National Hurricane Center and NOAA. You can see there for the southwestern parts of Florida, anywhere from around 1 to 5 feet of surge expected from the Keys up to Charlotte Harbor as the storm passes by. Then as we go on up there to around Tampa Bay, getting closer to that 5 to 8 foot above normal ground level saltwater surge threshold. 6 to 10 feet as you go on up there towards, I believe that's the Anclote River. I apologize if I read that wrong. This is smaller on my end as I'm reading this right now on screen. Heading on up there to the Big Bend of Florida, you see those purple areas. That is where we could be upwards of 10 to 15 feet of storm surge. That is life-threatening inundation at that point. All of this is really life-threatening in the worst possible scenario, but especially the 10 to 15 feet storm surge, that is where you're going to be inundated probably in some of those first rows of houses and buildings there. And then as we go on over there towards the western part of the panhandle of Florida, the surge quickly drops off after a 5 to 10 foot little zone there in the red. All right, I really want to take the last few minutes of this video to focus in on the likely wind gusts and the likely heavy rainfall where it is going to pour the most. Here is the wind gust output from the NAM 3-kilometer model. This is going to be your highest end model. This is pretty much the most catastrophic situation that could occur. Again, this is projected to become a 100 mile per hour at least major hurricane, a 115 mile per hour major hurricane upon landfall by that point. But this model really picking it up at least to 120 plus miles per hour, and I do not think that is the most likely scenario. Nonetheless, be prepared for the worst. This is your worst case, Cat 4, Cat 5 coming on land there. Places just south of Tallahassee, from Apalachicola over there to around places like Cedar Key. This is where that worst impact would be felt. Now let me go ahead and show it to you with the more likely scenario with that European model. Notice as we go through the day, Thursday here, you can see the entirety of the Florida Peninsula really covered with some 40 plus mile per hour gusts. We could see some isolated power outages from that, especially as you get closer to that west coast where some tropical storm conditions more consistently will be more likely. Tampa Bay at some point late Thursday, you'll probably pick up on some 60 plus mile per hour wind gusts if those aren't at least sustained already. And then at some point into our late Thursday going into early Friday, again, those heaviest winds come on shore right in this general zone, moving into southern Georgia as well, even as far east as Jacksonville, Florida, and over there into Savannah, Georgia. We could see some wind gusts 50 plus miles per hour, but closer to that core right there in some of those areas where you see those maroonish shades, 80 to 90 miles per hour for those gusts in pretty widespread fashion where this comes on shore. Then from there we see it push inland. This is just model output. It might not occur like this, but still, this model indicates we could see widespread 40 to 50 mile an hour winds moving over a chunk of Georgia, South Carolina, into western North Carolina, and southeastern Tennessee. That would definitely bring some power outages, especially with the heavy rain piling on top of that. Notice from there the winds could even move up there into the Ohio Valley. I don't know if you can still see it on screen, but at least around 35 to 40 miles per hour still being possible into late Friday and into early Saturday into some parts of Indiana and Kentucky. And last but not least, rainfall and tornado threats. Let's start with the rainfall. Here's a look at the latest Tropical Storm Helene rainfall forecast from the Weather Prediction Center and NOAA. Notice right where this thing comes on shore, you're in that yellow zone. A lot of Florida, at least in the dark green 2 to 4 inch zone for most communities. There could be locally higher amounts there, but it's this yellow and orange zone just south of Tallahassee and in surrounding communities where we have that best chance of 4 to 6 inches. To even upwards of 6 to 8 inches. We probably will see some of those spots get closer to a foot of rain, so be prepared for significant flash flooding in these areas. Then we see a little bit of a drop-off where we could still see some scattered flooding through southern and eastern parts of Alabama and into southern Georgia. I still think there will be plenty of 6-inch totals to go around here. And then we pick it back up to well over 6 inches as you get up into the foothills of the Appalachians and into the southern Appalachians themselves. Notice as you go from Atlanta up there to Asheville, North Carolina, there's that little chain banking up against those southern Appalachians where you get that terrain. You get the landslide potential up against those mountains as the 12-plus inch rain totals will be more abundant. So I'm really concerned about some of this rainfall, not only at the coast, but also as you go well inland, and even up here through a lot of the Ohio Valley. Let me delete that circle. There we go. Now you can see this area. This entire zone, I mean, we're picking up 2 to 4 inches of rain plus in a quick period of time as the storm spins around. This will definitely be enough to produce some isolated flooding, but again, the biggest flood threat is going to be right on through this zone here. Last but not least, that tornado risk zone discussion. I really think in any of these areas in the yellow, that's where the best chance, although other areas could get included, the best chance for isolated tornado potential will be. And in those orange zones coming out of Florida through a lot of the central zones of Florida, up into some parts of the eastern panhandle and northern peninsula, into southeast Georgia, southern parts of South Carolina, and then into southern North Carolina. That is where we have the best chance for some scattered tornadoes as those bands really move in from southeast to northwest, kind of being drawn towards the system. The best chance for tornadoes will probably peak Thursday night going into Friday as this comes on shore and picks up steam coming out of Florida into Georgia and South Carolina. So I'll be posting more updates in the community tab here on my channel with information. Hopefully I'll have another video out at some point, but that is it for all the info in this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, make sure you're leaving a like and subscribe down below.